You're going to find in your assignments and in the lab many cases where you're going to be asked to graph a certain function. And a lot of students complain, oh, I don't like Excel. Well, you're going to find 90% of companies use Excel either to show or demonstrate experimental data, could be to calculate savings and capital, or you may have some other use for it. You're going to find it many, many places. So it's good to have a background in doing graphs and working with Excel. So let's do an example. We're going to take some distance function, x, function of t, and we're going to use a formula, t squared plus sine 4 pi times t. And don't forget our units are in meters. Now the velocity function is equal to the derivative with respect to t of x of t, and that's just going to be, well, this first term is going to be 2t, and the derivative of the second term, we have to use chain rule. Don't forget that. Cosine 4 pi t, and the chain rule, d dt of 4 pi t. And that just gives us 2t plus 4 pi cosine 4 pi t. And don't forget our units are going to be meters per second. So we want to graph these two functions in Excel. Now you'll notice that I have 4 pi in the distance formula, and I have 4 pi twice in the velocity function. And so we're going to use absolute referencing for 4 pi in our formulas. And if you haven't seen the video on referencing types, now would be a good time to take a look at that so that you have an idea of what we're doing. So let's go into Excel. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create my constant. So I'll do an equals 4 times, I'm going to use the function pi, and remember you have to put open and close parentheses with that. So that gives us our constant. Now let's drop down, we're going to have t, and you can put here seconds if you want. That way you can remember the units. The next column we're going to have x of t, and that's going to be in meters. And then we have the velocity at t, and that's going to be meters per second. Now we're going to graph from 0 to 3 seconds. So I'm going to start with a 0, and I'm going to make my next value 1/100th. And as we did in the previous example in referencing types, we can highlight these two, grab this little box in the corner, and I'm going to drag this down till I get to 3. So that's going to be 300 points about. Actually 301 if you count 0. Okay. Now I need to put my formulas in. So for x, function of t, well, let's see, that was equal to, now I need my t value, So I'm going to say A5, and I'm going to use the caret and squared plus sine, and then I need to have 4 pi times t. Well, I'm going to use 4 pi. I'm going to go up here to A1, and I'm going to press Control, well, sorry, on my computer it's function F4, but in your computer it may just be F4. So if you need to do that, figure out if you have to press the function key or just F4. And then the time value, so I'm going to have times my t value, and close parenthesis. So there's my first function. And now I need to do the velocity function. So that's going to be equal to 2 times our t value plus, and I'm going to set for my constant, press F4 to lock it in, absolute referencing, times cosine. Now, you don't have to use F4 all the time. If it's easier for you to type, you can just write $A$1, and then I'm going to multiply times my t value. Now, I need to copy these formulas all the way down to the end. And that could be, there's different ways of doing it. This is one way that I've found that's kind of easy. I can choose my first cell that I want to copy and press Shift and the right arrow, selects it, both of the cells, press Control C to copy. Now I want to get to the end of the list. So if I use my arrow keys to get over to the T column, now I can find the end of my list very quickly if I press Control and down arrow. That gets me to the bottom, and now I can just use my right arrow key, and I'm going to highlight the cell next to it. And now I need to select all the cells up to the top. So I'm going to press Shift, Control, up arrow. And now I have all those cells highlighted, and now I can press Control V, and this gives me my formula and all of the values. Okay. Now we can graph. Now the easiest way to graph is to just take and highlight all of your data. So I'll go up here, grab my header for time, and I'm going to do the same kind of idea that I did before, except I need to highlight. So I'm going to press Shift, Control, right arrow. That gets me the top heading, and now I need to do all the data. So don't take your finger off the Shift and the Control, and take and press the down arrow, and that selects all of my data. Now I need to go to Insert, and we're going to use a scatter chart. Always use scatter chart. Do not use line chart. It doesn't work for what we're trying to graph. Always use scatter chart. Scatter chart, you can choose either with data points or without. I'll just use without for the moment. And you see it creates a pretty quick graph for you. It even marks the legend telling you you have your distance function. We put in our units here, meters. You also have the velocity function in meters per second. Now, I really don't like using graphs inside of a sheet. You can do that, but to me it's easier if you put the graph in its own sheet. And the way you can do that is right-click on the graph and tell it to move chart. And we're just going to create a new sheet, and we're just going to call it chart 1. You can name it whatever you want. Click OK, and now we have our graph. So let's make it a little bit nicer. Go to Layout, and let's give it a chart title. Do that above the chart. You're going to see a chart title come up. Just take and click at the beginning and highlight the text, and we can name it whatever we want. Now, the legend, you can keep it on the side, but we're going to do something special here. So I'm going to move my legend, and one place that's kind of good for a legend is at the bottom. So we'll put the legend down here. And now I have these two graphs on the same y-axis. But I may not want that. Maybe I want to split this up. So I can take and click on my data for the velocity, right click on it, format data series, and I'm going to tell it I want to put it on the secondary axis. So now this axis over here refers to the velocity and on the right hand side, and the left vertical axis refers to the distance. But you need to indicate which one is which so that the viewer of the graph will be able to understand which is which. So what you can do is go to Axis Titles, and let's do the horizontal axis. We're going to do that below the axis. And here, remember it was T, and we need to put the unit in seconds. Now you can write T in seconds like this, perfectly acceptable. Or you can use a parenthesis with an S, not a problem. And we'd like to make this font a little bit bigger. So you can highlight the text and go up and make our font a little bit bigger here. There we go. Now, the next, we want to take and do this graph. And we're going to use Axis Titles, Primary Vertical Axis. We're going to do a rotated title. And now just kind of click and grab the text, and you can change it. This is our distance in meters. Now again, you can just put the distance with a parenthesis m, close parenthesis, that's fine. Just we need to have the units there so that we know if it's meters, millimeters, whatever it may be. Okay, and now we can click or click outside, or in this case I'm going to make this text a little bit bigger. So we'll do 16 there, and now I want to do my secondary vertical axis title, and that's going to be rotated. Now we're going to highlight the text and do velocity in meters per second, or you can do, like I said, with the parenthesis. And I'm going to highlight the text and make it a little bit bigger. The other thing you can do, if you miss this little pop-up menu, you can go to Home and you can change your font size here. Now, I really don't like the fact that the way the wording is here. I'd like to be able to flip that. So if I right-click on the axis title, go down to Format Axis Title, and go to Alignment, and go to Text Direction, and it gives you an example of all the different ways you can align the text, and I want to align it at 90 degrees. It makes it a little bit better. So now we have a nice graph with all the labels. We have a legend, so I know which color is my distance function, which color is my velocity function. I have two separate axes with the values specific to those graphs on both sides, and I have both of my vertical and my horizontal graphs with titles to make everything clear. This is what a graph should look like for your homework assignments and for your labs.